So this morning I want to ask you to, for the moment, just for a little while, to take a break from your self-concern, whatever that may be. To take a break from listening to anything I might say as a way, as something that could be utilized to help you. Okay? Not that listening in that way is a bad thing, but what I want to speak about this morning, which I don't really know what it is, but I have a feeling, it's not going to be applicable. Okay? You're not going to be able to use it. If you listen to it in a mind that is taking it in and trying to utilize it to solve something, then it will just deceive and confuse you. Okay? My intent is not this morning to help you. I want to, as it were, I know this is a loaded term, but transmit something to you. And that's not something that can happen while you're busy trying to be helped. It gets in the way. So maybe you can just put it on hold. Whatever your dilemma is, whatever you may be trying to solve. Just for the moment. So the only way that it appears as though I can really speak about what seems to want to be said is to do it with a bit of a story. Now, when I got into all this spirituality, I did not know what I was getting involved in. Neither did you. You may think you know what you're getting involved in, but you most surely do not know, and you did not know. None of us know. So I didn't at all, in any way, not even a little bit, comprehend or understand what I was getting into. And what was actually opening up for me from the very beginning. And I say this because you are all involved in this just simply because you're here. When I went to see my teacher, I was going because I had read in the back of some book. By the way, she does not have any idea how she got in the back of the book, because she was the kind of person who would make no attempts to get in the back of books, much less in the front of books. But in the back of some book, I saw this name, this location, in this directory of various meditation or spiritual centers. Since I was interested in Zen, I looked under the Zen part, and lo and behold, I found this lady's name as a Zen teacher in Los Gatos. And that was thrilling to me, because I lived in Cupertino. Los Gatos, California is about a 15-minute drive from Cupertino, California. So you can imagine, being about 20 or 21, how thrilled I was to find that I could find a Zen teacher 15 minutes away from where I lived. I was afraid I was going to have to go to, God knows where, Japan or something, which wasn't appealing to me. I mean, maybe if I go there it will be, but the idea was not particularly appealing. And so off I went one morning, and I had no idea what to expect. Although I did have expectations that I didn't even know I had. And my expectations were fortunately, in retrospect, but unfortunately at the moment, not met. For all I knew, I was going to some hidden Zen temple in the foothills of Los Gatos, California, tucked away in some misty, shrouded place. Must look like one of those Chinese ink, drawings. And lo and behold, of course, on the way there, I got lost. The directions were clear, but my following them was not. And that actually should have told me that something was up. How I got lost, I have no idea how, looking back on it. The way that I got lost was the most ridiculous way you could ever get lost. Why it happened, it's rather clear now, but at the time it was the oddest thing. I just found myself driving through this road, and for some reason, going on a perfectly clear, obvious road and going up the side of a hill, mountain, and it took a turn to the left, and for some reason I thought I was supposed to go down this little obscure, very obscure, right in the middle of that corner, this dirt road went straight. And it wasn't an obvious dirt road. It was the kind of dirt road with lots of weeds on the side and plenty of weeds in the middle where the tires didn't... Why I went down this dirt road made no sense whatsoever. And that there was a dirt road was odd to begin with, because it was in an area that was in the foothills, but one didn't see dirt roads anywhere. It was, houses and streets, and so I end up going down this dirt road, and of course it goes to some house about 3/4 of a mile back, and of course I think, is this the house? And it's definitely not the right address. So I turn around in a totally confused state and make it back out to the road and decide I'm completely lost, but I might as well keep going in the direction I was going. And lo and behold, another half mile up the road, there's a house. And there's an address on the mailbox. And it's the address. And I think, great, I found it, the address. And of course I look up, and it's a house. It's kind of in the foothills, but it's not mist enshrouded. It doesn't look oriental, doesn't look mysterious, doesn't look alluring. No temple bells, no, robe-clouded monks walking around. So I go up towards the house, and I go to the front door. Again, obscurity ruled the day. It was a very strange house. Most houses, the front door is made very clear to you, like so that somebody walking up the driveway would have a clear idea of where to go if they're to knock on the door. And so most front doors are actually facing the driveway in some manner, right? Or the walkway that you go up, and you walk, and there's a front door, and it's right in front of you. This front door was actually like a little side door tucked against a wall that on a driveway that you could just easily walk right past it, which of course I did, because it was so obscure. And I walked past it, and then I saw there was, this sort of little bamboo fence, which is a little kind of Asian looking, which was nice, and a little gate that had a little wooden hinge thing to open, which looked kind of Asian, so that things were looking up a little bit. But there was no sign on the fence, no sign on the door, no nothing. And being the kind of person that I am, I was kind of like, or that I was kind of like, I don't know if I should go in there. There's no sign. Where's the front door? This is all very confusing. And so, like the dirt road, I turned around, went back down the driveway a little bit, and tried it again. I looked at the mailbox. It's the right the right house. So I walk up the driveway. And this time I see that door on the right-hand little wall. And it has a little tiny sign hanging from the doorknob, very small. And it just says Zazen, which for those of you who don't know, in Zen, Zazen is a word for meditation. Zazen with an arrow pointing towards the gate that I just had turned around from. So I went, I opened the gate, I go back, and it opens into this little courtyard kind of area, very open, no fences. The only fence was in front of the courtyard, but once you got behind there, it was just this big, beautiful, open space, little courtyard. And again, kind of obscure. Where do I go? I'm in this little courtyard, and it's very woodsy, and there's no more little pointers. And I kind of look around for a while, and then I see a little staircase, outdoor staircase to the steps up to the right. And I seemed like the only place one could go. A little obscure, but nonetheless I go up the stairs. And I end up on a wooden deck. And then from the wooden deck, then I see a sliding glass door, because I'm in the backyard now, and there's a sliding glass door into the backyard. And I see a few pairs of shoes outside the sliding glass door. And I think that must be it. But of course, mind you, I'd read Zen books, so I had this idea of what it was going to be like, and it wasn't a sliding glass door in a home tucked away in the mountains. It was so I looked at the sliding glass door, and it didn't have any sign, and I was kind of, do you just like walk into someone's house? It didn't seem, there was a couple of pairs of shoes, but nobody seemed to be in the house. And, so I'm a little intimidated, and I'm looking at this door from a distance. Should I just open the door? I mean, that's kind of weird to do in someone's house you haven't been to and nobody's there. So I feel, well, I can knock on the window door, and I walk up to the sliding glass door. And about that time, this woman in her 50s or 60s kind of comes sauntering into the door was actually the sliding glass door opened into the kitchen. And there this lady in her 50s, 60s came in, and she saw me, and she opened the door, and the only thing she said is, "Put your shoes there." So I take off my shoes, I put them down, and I start to, go in, and she opens the door, and then she just sort of gestures. And so I just go in the direction that she gestures. And I had been meditating for some time, about a year or so on my own, and I had meditated on this blanket that I'd had for a long time. It was one of those furry blankets, a little kind of fuzz fur, and it had this it was a big blanket like you could put over your bed, and it had this big sort of lion face on it, and this fuzzy kind of fur. Something that, you'd give like to a 10-year-old little boy, and he'd really love, and it's probably when I was given it, and I still liked it. And I used to fold that up into a bundle about this big, and that's what I would sit on. Because, I'd heard that Zen people meditate on cushions, but I didn't know where the hell to find one. This was 28, 29 years ago. It wasn't like today, you remember? Some of you. They weren't like meditation cushions everywhere, they didn't have them. Hell, you can almost go into your local grocery store and, or at least like your Whole Foods and get a meditation cushion. But I didn't know where to get one. And so I walked in there, and I had my little blankie tucked under my arm, because that's what I was going to sit on. And she just gracefully gestures to the room next door, and I go and I turn, and I just go into this room. Nothing's said. And I look in this room, and it's this beautiful, it was her living room was really what it was. And most of the furniture was taken away or pushed to the sides, and there was these lines of beautiful black mats going down either side of the room. It was a rather long living room. It was beautiful with glass on either side. Almost the entire side of both sides were these big, huge glass windows all the way down to the very end. And at the very end of the room was a little Buddha figure, not the classical sort of sitting Buddha, but a Kanzeon, Bodhisattva of compassion, very sort of feminine Buddha there. And I looked at these, and each black mat had this perfectly placed black cushion right in the center of it. Everything was just exquisitely set up, put down. Nothing haphazard, no mat was askew, no cushion was not in the center. Everything was just beautiful and perfect. And of course, I looked and I walked in the room, and there were already a few people kind of sitting down. And I looked and I saw the cushions, and I suddenly became extremely self-conscious that I had my blankie in my hand. And I did what probably most self-conscious 20-something males would do. I kind of walked over next to the wall, and I kind of turned my back to the wall, so I was facing inside of the room, and I tried to kind of slide the blanket behind me so that I could just sort of sit down and push it against the wall like I didn't have it. And I could kind of, glide over to the cushion, and I could sit down on the cushion. So that's what I did. So the morning was ruled by, number one, total obscurity, right? Getting lost, going down weird, obscure dirt roads, going up to this weird, finding this obscure house, not find the front door is obscure, walking past nothing was like real obvious. And that combined with mild level of humiliation or embarrassment for having my blankie with me, and nothing's really explained. Just, you can take your shoes off there. Anyway, the morning continued, and we meditated, and we did everything that I did there over the next 13, 14 years. And what I didn't know at the time was that I was actually, in a very profound way, I was being initiated into a certain lineage. I didn't know that because I thought initiations were like, formal sort of ceremonies and, gurus tapping their students on their heads and their crown chakras exploding, or, God knows what. I didn't even think that far at the beginning. I just thought it was kind of a confusing, strange morning. Only years later many years later did I begin to understand actually what was happening. But the obscurity, the hiddenness, the lack of exterior forms. The only exterior form there was those cushions in that living room, was actually part of a certain type of lineage. Now, fast forward years later, when I had got to know this middle-aged lady named Arvis. And after some years, I thought I would really like to do one of those, like real serious Zen retreats that you read about in books, those sashins, and they just sound very intriguing and mysterious and, lovely. And I'd read books on them. And Arvis had talked about doing them, and so I asked her, I said, do you know anywhere where I can do one of these sessions, one of these retreats? And she said, well, I've heard of this guy, I've met this guy up in this area, and I think I met him and I trust him pretty well, so he'd probably be pretty good to go see. And that's as much as she told me. So I found it and I wrote to them. You couldn't go on a website, they didn't have one, and they wrote me back and the whole thing. And next thing I know, I'm up at this retreat. Now the retreat. Now this is Zen. Up in the mountains. It is foggy. There's a temple bell, a big temple bell. There's a beautifully robe-clad monk, getting ready to ring the bell, and there's a beautiful, meditation hall, absolutely gorgeous, hardwood floors, beautiful Buddha figures. Almost everybody in there was in some of these beautiful black robes, except me, which once again kind of feeling a little bit like when I had the blankie under my arm, like, okay, who's the rank amateur in this room? It was me. So I go there and I do. And I've talked about briefly that retreat and how difficult that was. And few years later, for various reasons, because of what we had talked about, the teacher up at this particular place, I told them that I was interested in becoming a monk, because I thought if you want to be enlightened, you got to become a monk. It just seemed like every enlightened guy in the Zen tradition seemed to be some monk, except for Layman Pang. Layman Pang was this layman, which I found is like a dirty word among monks, layman. You're such a layman, But Layman Pang was very, very highly regarded. In fact, in the tradition, there's all these stories of Layman Pang basically dancing circles around the Zen masters in his responses and his clarity. But nonetheless, so I thought, well, I guess if I want to become enlightened, then I got to become a monk. And I had expressed some mild interest in this thing. But this teacher had a temple, and people looked like monks and were dressed like monks often, but they weren't actually any monks. He was a monk, he was a priest, he was a Zen master, he was all that, but it didn't seem like he was doing the monk thing. He had a temple, not a monastery and all that. And I sort of was talking to him about this, and he just sort of very casually said, well, why don't you become my first monk? And I kind of... I thought we were just talking about it, And of course, one of the first things I thought that I didn't express was, why me? Like, I'm just like some 23-year-old doofus. I don't even have a robe. Everybody else has a robe, So I was actually kind of taken aback. Like, I thought, well, that's really great. I mean, I just said what I thought I wanted and was given it on a silver platter. And then, of course, I thought, well, why me? You know what? I mean, was it just because I asked? Or I didn't even ask to become one. I just expressed some interest. So I don't know why me. I still don't know why me. Not that it matters anymore, but the long and the short of it is, obviously I didn't end up becoming a monk. I did spend times at various Zen monasteries and other areas over the years, but I never ended up becoming a monk. For years, I'd had a premonition that I was going to be dead by the time I was 25. Or sometime in the 25th year, I was going to die. And it was one of those premonitions that you kind of feel you absolutely know is true. But the odd thing was, I never stayed awake at night thinking about it or worrying about it. I never had a slightest twang of fear, of apprehension, of regret. It was just sort of some fact. You will be dead on your 25th year. And it didn't seem strange at the time. Only in retrospect did it seem strange to have such a premonition and be so certain about it, but have no feeling about it whatsoever. No, like I said, no fear, no nothing. Well, the 25th year was actually the year that I had my first awakening. It didn't end up to be the death that I thought. I thought I was in for the physical kind. But this one was actually much more real and substantial than the physical kind, which isn't important to explain, really. One has to find out for themselves. Now, at that moment, at 25, there was most definitely a death. And there was a certain awakening. And fortunately, my teacher told me two things. Very, very good. Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. You're 50% there. Really wonderful thing. Wonderful, good. You've seen truth. Lovely. 50% of truth. And then I was told, you've seen that form is emptiness, but you have not seen that emptiness is form. Of course, I was 50% awake, so I didn't know what the hell that meant. I did know what it meant that form was emptiness, but I didn't know the other side of the coin. So years later, 7, maybe 8 years later, another moment of clarity. Let's call it just a moment of clarity rather than some big word. Another moment of clarity. I got the other half. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. One of the first things I said in fact, the first thing I said to my teacher when we did talk about it, because we didn't talk about it for quite a long time, a couple months, I had no impulse to say anything to her about it. It was like there was just no reason that anybody really needed to know. And it was odd in retrospect. I thought, well, I mean, that's what she's there, so she probably would. That's the only reason I ended up talking to her about it, because it occurred to me after a few months, well, that's what she's doing. I mean, she might actually like to know. So I kind of did it out of a sense of obligation. Like, she should probably like to know something that's happened. But the funny thing was, it was so, in one sense, self-contained. It didn't need anything from the outside. It didn't need approval. It didn't need handshaking, well done, slap on the back. It didn't need anything. It was so obvious, so ridiculously present, so unimaginably what it was, that there was no need to have anybody say anything about it. But after a few months, I thought she might like to know. So I was talking to her and describing what, not just what had happened, but what was seen. What was seen was more important and relevant than what had happened. And very early in our conversation, I said to her, and this is the thing that I was a bit apprehensive about saying, but I knew that it was true, so I had to. And I said, this is bigger than Zen, isn't it? And she looked at me and she said, yes, it is. And I didn't even know it at the time. I don't know if she knew it. Because things can happen that are very significant and powerful without you even knowing it. In fact, I would say the things that are most significant and most powerful are the things that you don't even know are happening. But only in retrospect, years later, did I realize that what had occurred on one level is there was realization that was simple enough, that was obvious enough, but it didn't end up to be like I thought it would. I didn't imagine that it would sort of take me out of the tradition I was in. In essence, it took me out of the lineage of tradition. What I didn't know is that it actually took me into the lineage of my teacher. You would think my teacher was a Zen teacher. She would even call herself as such. She may or may have not even thought of herself as such. I don't know. We never talked about it. But she had the Zen cushions. I mean, hell, most of the robes that people go wear in Zen temples now in America, guess who came up with a design for them? She did. She got one of those robes on a trip to Japan. She brought it back. She made a pattern out of it. And that's where most of all these black robes you see Zen Buddhists wearing, that's where they come from. That was the first sort of pattern right, that was made. Although she didn't wear them. She used to. I mean, hell, she sewed them and made them available for people in the very, very early times. But she no longer wore them. She was very much of a Zen teacher in a sense. The form, the chanting, everything. The form we followed in her little house was the same as they followed in any temple I ever went to. And yet, there was a whole different lineage happening. Most of the lineages we know are lineages that are rooted in time. Someone somewhere has a realization. They awaken from the dream of mind. And they decide to root that in the world of time. And that's the beginning of a tradition. Maybe the person themselves doesn't even try to root it in time, but eventually somebody tries to root it in time. And by rooting it in time, I mean they start to find ways and means to bring the formless into form. That's where you get traditions from. Spiritual traditions, esoteric traditions. Right? That's where you get the forms. That's where you get the Zen bowing and the ritualized chanting and the ritualized eating and the ritualized everything. You go into a Zen temple, I mean, everything's ritualized. I mean, if you go into a Zen monastery, you walk into the bathroom and you'll find the little chant that you chant when you sit down on the john. And you'll find the chant you chant when you wash your hands, and you'll find the chant that you chant when you dry your hands, and you'll find the chant that you chant when you leave. And everything is ritualized. So this and all of that is an attempt to bring the formless into form. Not to lock it into form, not to confine it into form, but to make it available. It's a doorway, right? It's a doorway into the infinite. That's what all this traditional stuff is. It's somebody trying to bring the infinite and root it into this world. I'm very well aware through direct experience that everything is already that, and I'm very aware that it's already one, and it's already the infinite, and I know all that, but that's why I said, don't listen to this as if it's something you're trying to understand, because it's not understand. It doesn't make sense. Even if you hold on to any philosophy, dualistic or non-dualistic, what I'm saying doesn't make sense. And the reason is truth doesn't make sense. It just doesn't. Not to the mind, not to any philosophy, not to any ideology. It goes right past them all. In the same way that I said to my teacher, this is bigger than Zen. If I was something else, if I was into Advaita, I would have said this is beyond Advaita. If I was into some non-dual philosophy, which I wasn't, I never heard of the stuff, I would have said, this is beyond non-dual philosophy. And I'm sure she would have shook her head and went like, that's the whole point. Right? But that moment of that's the whole point, that was an initiation, and that was an acknowledgement into a totally different lineage of truth. It was not a lineage that was rooted in time. So there is lineage that is rooted, many lineages that are rooted in time, and then there are lineage that is not rooted in time. The lineage that does not rooted in time, there is no beginning to it. There is no founder to it. You cannot put a face on it. It didn't begin 2,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago or 20 minutes ago. It has no beginning to it. It has no end to it. And it has no face to it. Because it's not rooted in time. It's not rooted, can we say? It's not, there's no attempt to root it into the world of illusion. Because that's what traditions are. They're trying to root truth into the world of illusion. So you have a doorway. Right? Unfortunately, what happens over the years is it gets to be more rooting and more rooting and more rooting, and each person likes to plant their own little seed, their own little root, right? And before you know it, you got tradition. The traditions are often no longer actually these little doorways into the infinite. They're not just the rooting of the transcendent into the world of time and space, but they actually become behemoths in and of themselves. So all you end up with is roots and clutters of roots and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of roots. And it's very hard to work your way through all the roots. It's like a field of weeds. Not always, just 90% of the time. Of course, every once in a while someone comes along and pulls the weeds. Right? Like a guy like Jesus comes along and he yanks out a bunch of weeds and redefines a whole tradition. Of course, some went with him, some didn't. That's fine. Both traditions are fine. But he was someone who came in and yanked out tons of form, tons of the old structure. And of course, it got him killed for doing it. But he did it anyway. Why did he do it? Because he had to do it. To breathe life back into something. What have we done with what someone like that has done? What have we done with what he did? Filled the whole damn thing full of weeds again. There's more weeds than there was when he started. Now he has become a weed, you know? Layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers and layers. That's okay. You know? Something else will come along and pull the weeds out again and breathe new life, you know, into this structure, into this thing, whatever it is, whether it's the Christian thing or the Jewish thing or the Buddhist thing or the whatever thing. You see, only in retrospect did I realize that the very first day I was going up to find this obscure teacher's house, What I didn't know was that from the time I left home, I was being initiated into this timeless lineage of truth. The very obscurity of it was a teaching. The very point that you could almost not find the house, going down weird roads, not looking like what you think it's going to look like. The front door is not facing the driveway. It's facing to the side of the driveway. You can walk right past it and not even know it's there. There's so little of it that's rooted in time that you can miss it, and you miss it over and over and over and over and over and over. And so in a certain sense, I was being ushered into this totally different tradition. Not something that was really rooted in time. Time is rooted in it. It's not rooted in time. Therefore, when you come upon it, it doesn't have, as I said, there's no face to it. There's no historical figure in the past or the present. And so it's very easy. It's easy to miss because we keep looking for obvious things. We look for obvious things, like I was looking for robe-clad monks and big bells and temples and misty-covered mountains and all of that. And then I didn't find any of it. And when I did find it, and the door was open, wide open to me, to walk right into it, to walk right into a tradition that was rooted in time, which is fine. It's not one's better than the other. They're just different. When the door was open, wide open for me, and I was given everything I thought I wanted, for some reason I couldn't understand. I couldn't make any sense of it. I just couldn't do it. Why couldn't I do it? Simply because there was another destiny. It just wasn't going to be the way it works out. It just wasn't going to be that way. There's no reason other than that. There's a fork in the road, and you go the only way you can go. You don't know that at the time. You may be confused why you go down one fork, why you don't go down another. But really, you go only the way you could go. You never really had a choice in it. You never had a decision point. You thought you did, but it was all inextricably laid out from the very beginning. Because remember, that kind of tradition is not rooted in time. There's no beginning, there's no past, there's no start, there's no finish. So the whole deal was sealed from the very outset. You see. And of course, it had a cumulative point when I actually woke up to what was actually happening, and realized this is bigger than Zen, which means this is bigger than any of the forms we put it into. I have no problem with the forms we put it into, whether we call it very traditional Zen or Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam or Judaism or whatever the form is. The forms are fine, as long as the forms deliver you beyond them. You may still have a tendency to root what is beyond time back into time through a particular form. You may not. But when I realized this is bigger than Zen, that was the moment. That I didn't know it at the time, but that was the significant moment. That was the entering. Not I had entered, but that was being fully swallowed up by a lineage that does not have its roots in time. it's obscure. It's more obscure than when I was trying to get to that little Zen teacher's house in Los Gatos, and the front door wasn't facing front, and nothing was obvious, and very little was said. It seemed very obscure. A church is not obscure. It's there, it's not. You walk in, you feel the presence in the church, whatever it may be. It's all laid out there. What it's pointing to may be obscure, but the thing itself, not obscure. A Zen temple, there it is. It's not obscure. It's right there. What I'm speaking about, totally obscure. It's not there. There's no building that houses it. There's no theology that contains it. There's no teacher that is the sole embodiment of it. It's totally obscure, not rooted in the world of time. The paradox is what seems so obscure, what seems to be completely unrooted in the world of time, as ultimately truth always is, when you finally see it, when you finally become it, then what seems so obscure is the most obvious thing in the world. When you finally see it, then you realize it wasn't obscure. It was right out in front the whole time. Its form is not a particular form, its form is every form. It's not a temple, it's not a Zen thing, it's not a Christian thing, it's not a Jewish thing. Whatever it is. It's every form. It's all of those and all the rest. And none of that. All at the same time. What you are takes all those forms, all of them, never stuck in any of them, never minding appearing as any of them, but at the same time, never being rooted in them. It's rooted in something beyond. What you are is rooted in something beyond all the forms, including the form of your particular body. It takes that form, but it's not rooted there. It's not stuck there. Nor is what I'm speaking about rooted in any ideology. It's not dualistic, it's not non-dualistic, it's not Advaitic or Buddhist or anything. It can display itself through all of that, easily, effortlessly. But it's not confined by it, it's not defined by any of that. That's its obscurity. Its mercurial nature, right? It's meaning you, what you are, what I am. It doesn't matter where you go. You can go into all sorts of different spiritual dimensions. This is just one among hundreds. You can go all over the place. But all of them are just temporary forms of the formless. So I told you this wouldn't be useful to you. It's not something you can utilize. It's not even a lineage distinct from other lineages. Remember, it's not rooted in time, so it holds them all. So it's not something you can join. Right? You can't wear it on your sleeve. You know what I mean? You can't put the appropriate jewelry on. Any jewelry will do. Do you know what I mean? You can wear long flowing gowns, or you can wear blue jeans overalls. It doesn't matter, you see. Because in that there's nothing to join. There's no form you're stuck to. There's nothing you're confined to. Neither are you then confined to the formless, though. Neither are you confined to have to be in the timeless. You're even free from that. You're free to wander the universe as you please, as the truth of you does all the time. Now, one of the difficulties of all this is a all or nothing proposal. Right? This is an all or nothing kind of thing. Truth is something you get or you don't get. You swing and you hit the ball over the fence, or you strike. Right? There's no consolation prize. There's no gray area. Right? Does that make sense? Maybe, maybe not. Some of you it makes sense. Right? It's like truth or no truth. Realization or asleep at the wheel. When something tries to root itself in time, which is perfectly okay, I'm all for that. I do things that are rooted in time, so that's fine. But things that try to root themselves in time, very quickly they start serving the purposes and the demands of time. So you root something in time, so there you go. The next thing you do, you've got a church, you've got your temple, you've got whatever. And the next thing that happens is people go to that wanting it to help them. Right? It's natural. I'm in time, I'm having trouble, I'm in chaos, I'm suffering, I'm confused, I'm whatever, and I want you to help me. So I'm going to go to this thing, and it's going to help me. And there's so much pressure, there's so much intense pressure that as the years go by, these forms, these traditions, these institutions start succumbing to the pressure, right, of managing the dream state. Which is fine. The dream state, gosh, it's kind of a mess, so so it's okay that one manages the dream state, right? But so very easily, the forms start managing the dream state more than they do delivering you. Words are difficult. Beyond the dream state, but that's not really true. Because there is no beyond. To something other than the dream state. So that's what you run up against when you come up against something that has no anchoring in the world of time. It's basically saying, you come to it on its terms and only its terms. And that's it. You come to it on its terms or you don't come at all. No consolation prizes. You don't end up being able to be a priest or a monk or join the group or be part of a crowd, or there's no consolation prize, right? There's no guru, there's no savior, nobody you can put your hat on, no one who's going to save you, there's nothing there because it's not rooted in time. Does that make sense? So it's a beckoning. You come to it, it doesn't come to you. And yet it's always present. And the place you make contact with it is the last place you expect. Because remember, it's obscure. It's out in the open, but it's so out in the open you never think to look there. Never think to look there. You never think to look in the most obvious place. In any good inner tradition, in any good one, you're going to have some means of trying to draw your attention to it. And usually it starts as something very simple. And it should stay that way forever, something extraordinarily simple. There's one thing about everybody in this room that most people, it's always happening, but you pay no attention to it at all. You pay no attention to it because it's always happening. You pay no attention to it because it is totally obvious, but its obviousness is what makes it obscure. So we pay no attention to it. Because we're only paying attention to things that we can touch, feel, mostly think, imagine, hope, dream, smell, taste. That's where all our attention goes. Does that make sense? And if we just put our attention in our senses, that would be good enough. That would be fine. But we don't do that. We don't put our attention in our senses. We put them in what we think about, what our senses pick up. So we're not even connected with our senses. Our senses are always working. You feel this, you feel that, you imagine this, you smell this, you smell that. But how many people are really aware of what they smell, or aware of what they see, or aware of actually anything that's going on? What they're really aware of is what they think about what they see, what they think about what they smell, what they think about what they're thinking about, what they're imagining about what they're imagining. So they're in an abstraction. That's why in so many spiritual teachings, one of the first things you are asked to do is to start paying attention to your senses. Right? Like, notice that you're breathing. What could be more basic? Oh, I never noticed that. I've lived for 50 years and I've never noticed that I was breathing. I mean, I knew I was breathing, but I never noticed it. I never felt it. I never paid any attention to it. It's one of those obvious things that's obscure because it's so obvious. Because it's so obvious, you may never pay attention to it. Or you're told to pay attention to something else. Pay attention to how something smells, how something tastes. Pay attention to how you move. And Zen, they have you meditate, and then in between periods of meditation, you walk around like zombies in slow motion. It's called walking meditation. Do you know? Why are you doing that? So you can actually feel what the floor feels like under your feet. That's why you're doing it. It's no esoteric reason. So you can feel the floor. You've never felt it before. You've walked on it your whole life, but it's been so damn obvious, you've never actually noticed it. Sadly, usually that's as far as it goes. That's it. You're just stuck with trying to pay attention to your senses. Right? But if it goes a little bit further into something even more obvious, and again, because it's even more obvious, it's more obscure. Right? Not because it's hidden, but because it's obvious. There's something more obvious than what you pick up in your senses, what you see, the world around you, what you hear, what you feel, what you think. All that's pretty obvious, even though almost nobody's paying attention to it. They're only paying attention to what they think about all that. But there's something even more obvious than everything you take in with your senses. You hear it all the time in spiritual circles. But not one in 1,000 people understand it. And that is your own consciousness. What could be more obvious than consciousness? And yet what could be more obscure, more hidden? More, where is it? I can't quite find it, but I know it's here. It's what's allowing me to hear and feel and taste and touch and even think and see. So it's even more present More obvious than what you see, think, taste, touch, and feel. It's even more obvious. Your consciousness is more obvious than all that. It's so obvious, so unimaginably obvious, that it's unimaginably obscure. Where is it? You can't quite get your arms around it, can you? You can't quite get your feelings around it. You can't quite get your thoughts around it. It's there, but it's too obvious. And so what do we do when we find something like that? When someone points out, hey, okay, you've noticed that you're breathing. You've become aware that you're breathing. You become conscious of it. Now now become conscious of your consciousness. It's a little tougher, isn't it? It's a little tougher because it's more obvious. The awakeness of this moment is more obvious than anything in this moment, but it's too obvious. You can't grab it. You can't think about it. But you just stop. And by stopping right in the middle of your bewilderment, in your attempts to capture it, to understand it, to feel it, right in your attempt and your failure of trying to grasp the most obvious thing in the world, consciousness. Consciousness is more obvious than the world. Too obvious. So, too obvious that you can't grasp it, you can't think it, you can't imagine it. You can see a sight, you can see a color, you can see a plane, you can see your feet, you can see your nose, but you can't see the seeing of your nose. It's there, though. You can't even think about it. And what do you do when you hit a dilemma like that? When you're trying to come into contact with something that's so unimaginably obvious and present that you can't think about it, you can't imagine it, you can't find it. It's a dilemma, is it not? The ultimate dilemma. Something that's so obvious that you can't find it. Well, the only thing you can do, although most people take years before they do it, the only thing you can do is just stop and be bewildered. That's the only thing you can do. It's the only intelligent response. Most of us, I can name myself in this category, take years before we have an intelligent response to this, to be totally bewildered, to stop right in the middle of the dilemma. To realize that all attempts to capture this most basic principle of existence are futile. Philosophers couldn't do it, mathematicians haven't done it, brain surgeons haven't done it, biologists haven't done it, theologians haven't done it either. West or East, dualistic or non-dualistic. It evades all of it. Can you feel it? Can you sense it? You read a book. Beautiful words. Lovely words. Beautiful non-dual words. You're reading the book. You think, wow, what great truth this is. Lovely words. But that's not the truth. The truth is the consciousness that's looking at the damn words. That's the truth. Right? You don't find them in the words or what you think about it. That's why Jesus would say, I have nowhere to rest my head. Birds have their nests in the trees, the fox has the hole in the ground, and the Son of Man has nowhere to rest his head. And we can interpret that down into something really mundane and stupid. The poor guy wandered around, he didn't have a home, and Well, hell, even if you don't have a home, you can rest your head, just lay down. That's not what it means, nowhere to rest your head. Right? That's something like that's going to be spoken by someone who's actually bringing that new life, new breath, breathing something new, regenerative, creative, as consciousness is. And our little minds are always trying to use consciousness. If I can tell you how I could write a book that would sell more than all the books I ever have. I keep coming up with titles, one more unpalatable than the next. Right? I figure, what could be more unpalatable than the end of your world? I mean, who wants that? Right? But if I ever wanted to sell something and make $1 million, what consciousness can do for you? Right? That. And I know all the little Advaitic non-dualists would say, that's a stupid idea for a book, but I know half of them would be there in the dark of night. Looking in the bookstore. Not purchasing it because then someone could track you on your credit card, and you don't want to be caught doing that. So I use words like deception for a very particular reason. Because of thing of deception, trickery, sleight of hand, that's the world you live in. Where things seem obviously to be one way, but they're actually not that way at all. Because woven into the fabric of reality is illusion. And illusion isn't even something different or separate from reality. Illusion is the companion of reality. Ultimately, you see, illusion is reality. But what do we do when we encounter deception, trickery? More conventional language would be illusion, confusion, delusion. What's our instinct? Get away from it, right? I mean, once you're busy having spent years and years and years indulging in it, after that, then you see, which is a lot of what brings people to spirituality, when you start to see or sense or feel that it might just all be Maya, delusion, trickery. That the pursuit of everything we pursued might actually end up to be empty. Right? We slave away day and night, decade after decade, so we can hoard enough. So when we're 60 or 65, we can stop working and then begin living. But it's pure trickery. It's pure delusion. Because if you haven't lived for 6 decades, you aren't going to start living on the 6th. If you think life begins at some other point and now, you've fallen for the trick, right? So delusion and trickery and deception, it's woven into the fabric of life, of reality. And you catch on to that, and all of you have started to catch on to that. You wouldn't be here if you hadn't started to catch on to it. And when you sense it, you try to get away from it. Go somewhere else. Do something else. I will go from illusion to truth, delusion to reality. I will go from samsara to nirvana. I will get away from this trickery. I will not be deluded anymore. Which is the attitude itself. It's the ultimate delusion. It's the ultimate sleight of hand. It's the ultimate trickery. It's like one of those people in a downtown city street that does the little shell game. And they make it certain that they make it look as though you're certain where that little pea is under what shell, right? They make certain that you know where it is. So you'll pick it. But what they know is they've tricked you. They know they're making you look to one shell while they've put it in another. They've tricked you, right? So you give them money. And they say, well, look, let's do it again. See? Okay, now pick. And they pick it and they open it and there it is. You got it right. But you didn't have any money on the line that time. So they draw you in, right? Okay, $5. It's the same thing, but now they've deceived you and it's not there anymore. It happens all the time. Street corners all over America. Some people make their living doing it. And you got to hand it to them. Somebody that makes their livelihood on trickery, they've actually understood some little aspect of reality. At the very least, they're working with it rather than against it. So as I said, our tendency is to try to get away from delusion. We hear about enlightenment. Oh, it's something other than what's happening right here. Nirvana, that's something other than samsara. Clarity, that's very different from confusion. That's where I want to be. That's where I want to get to. I'm going to try to remove. I'm going to try to not be deceived. It's the easiest way to be deceived. I learned that when I was a salesman years ago. You know who the easiest person to sell something to is? Somebody who works as a salesman. They're easy because they think they understand. They think they know what you're doing. And they often do know what they're doing, but they can't help themselves. They know they're being tricked, but they get hooked anyway. It's odd. You would think if they know, they wouldn't fall for it. But no, it's just the opposite. They know and they fall for it. Right while they know it. Right in the middle of knowing it. They know what you're doing. And they do it anyway. So if you think you're wise, you're really lost. Now I'm giving away some trade secrets here, okay? If you're paying attention, you're going to get onto these. You're going to see that I'm actually doing this when people ask me questions all the time. Constantly, I'm doing the very thing I'm speaking about. You may not know it, but I can assure you, and the reason I'm putting it on the table is because ultimately it's not good enough for me to do it for you, is it? You got to do it for yourself. How many times have people been stuck in some trick, some delusion, some confusion? And I just say to them, fine, stop right there. Be confused, be deluded, be afraid, be confused. But one caveat, be it without trying to do anything about it. Be it without trying to escape. Make no effort to escape your delusion, your confusion, your anxiety, your guilt. Make no effort whatsoever. Don't feed it, but certainly don't fight it. And as soon as you can not feed it and not fight it at all, you've stopped right in the middle of delusion. You've allowed yourself consciously to fall for it. And that's where wisdom's born. Not by escaping it, but by consciously falling for it. Entering into its domain on its terms. Right? Letting yourself be deceived. Letting yourself be checkmated. But with the one little difference, you're no longer trying to not be. And as soon as you're trying not to be checkmated, as soon as you're not trying to not be defeated, to not be deluded, at that moment that all of your efforts to escape or indulge have left you, at that very instant, you're not deceived anymore. It happens all the time. The more you try to escape your illusion, the more stuck you are. Because the escape is the illusion. Just played out on a higher level. So my advice is, if you feel confused, be confused 100%. Allow it. Give it your whole universe. Be completely confused, except with one difference. Don't try to not be confused. Then illusion can't play its game with you. Then the game's over. Then wisdom is born. Right out of illusion, you see, because they're not two different things. So don't think this is about going from illusion to clarity. It's not. It's about finding clarity in illusion and finding illusion within clarity. Or as they say in Zen, something much more simple. Nirvana is samsara, samsara is nirvana. Okay. And let me in with this little piece too. And this is, I know, relevant for lots of people in this room. You can have a great moment of clarity, maybe a great awakening to true nature. Don't think that the game of illusion stops, because it doesn't. No, it just shifts up into another gear. Which means it gets more delusion, confusion, deception, sleight of hand gets more intelligent, not less. It has to shift up into something much more subtle to trick you. And it will, and it does. And the more you try to get away from it, the more you're caught in it. It's like quicksand. You step in it, the way to sink quickest is to struggle, flail. You flail yourself right to the bottom of the pit. Right? So those of you who have a moment of clarity, a moment of awakening, illusion rises its head again. You feel it's all obscured, it's all lost. Where did it go? What happened? And so you struggle to get back to where you once knew. You've fallen flat on your face, haven't you? It seems a reasonable thing to do, though. You were in clarity and now you're not. You were in some awakened space and now you're not. It seems only reasonable to try to get back there, does it not? To try to repeat it, to find that space. But of course, delusion is high level. It's using the very desire. The desire to do so is an illusion. It's a deception. See, because illusion and deception, it's not an evil force. It's not black magic. It's not the devil. It's just what life does. You see it all the time. Animals are decorated to look like things they're not. Right? Lizards look like rocks. But they're not rocks. They're lizards. It's deception. It's sleight of hand. It's life tricking itself, fooling itself in order to sustain itself. Who would have thought that life could use trickery, delusion, illusion to actually sustain itself? But it does, doesn't it? Look around you. That's what nature's doing. Look at those beautiful little spots on the deer. It's pure trickery and illusion. It's delusion. It's so when they sit in that field that they blend in and they don't look like deer and they fool. Nature has fooled herself again. And by fooling herself, she has sustained herself. If she didn't fool herself, she wouldn't last very long. So when you stop in the middle of anything, clarity or delusion, doesn't matter. When you no longer struggle, because struggling is like a man in quicksand trying to get out, which only takes him deeper in. When you realize the very impetus that confusion needs to continue, which is it needs your battle against it. If you stop in it, then the truth will be revealed there. Because until you can find truth in all the various forms of illusion, Not truth outside of illusion as an escape from illusion, but truth right in the middle of illusion, then you can easily be deceived again. That's why I'm always telling people, don't keep trying to get out of where you are. Where you are has truth, but you can't access it as long as you're struggling against it. As long as you're trying to get away, get out of it, get beyond it, figure it out. So I don't know, and I don't actually care one bit whether your destiny is to be one of a lineage that's rooted in time or a lineage is not. That doesn't matter. That's not my concern. Because I have no control over that. It doesn't matter to me in the slightest. The thing that is important, however, is that reality is everywhere. In form, out of form. In time, out of time. And it's only obscure because it's right out in front of you. Okay. You get the feel? That's all I'm trying to do. It's just, you get the feel. You just get the feel. Right? Okay. Illusion's always tricking you by getting you obsessed with content. Solve the content. Solve the content of your life and everything will be better. It's pure trickery, though. The most miserable people are the people that are always trying to solve themselves. Okay? There's something more primary. Come on up. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Stuart.
Hi, Stuart.
Thanks for picking on the cheap seats back there. So, last night, as at the end of satsang, as you spoke, the words you were speaking were directly experienced, and there was what came was that I was at rest, and in such a way that I did not know what the word rest meant before. Mm-hmm. And I've actually said this before in a situation just like this. And so there's a way that as language fails and deepening deepens, you can only I don't need to tell you this. Yeah. So
it's like trying to communicate across a vast chasm of space.
Yes.
Right.
And so my question, okay, so again, the clarity of searching for this, seeking it, mm-hmm. The ridiculous stupidity. I mean, just the, you do a great job of describing that. Thank you.
Having done it so long and to such an extent, it helps.
So I'm glad I don't have to try and do that. Mm-hmm. So So the question is my deepest my sense in and for me this glimpse, and every one is so unique, but I'll say that if I wish to call this one a glimpse, then this one was perhaps longer in time than many.
Mm-hmm.
My sense is of deep clarity. I mean, a clarity that there is no deeper clarity that I've experienced in my life.
Yeah.
And words I hear are confusing to me.
Yeah.
Sometimes
I wouldn't
these
listen too hard.
Okay.
Because the reason I say that is I want to make very clear that I'm often jumping around all over the place, which means I'm speaking to the person that I'm with, and I'm speaking to what it seems they are capable of hearing. I'm not interested in speaking something to somebody that they are not capable of hearing at that moment. That's why some of the stuff I'll say will be useful to you, and some of it will just seem totally useless. And why the hell is he saying it that way?
And so, so I've been in a lot of satsang in the last 4 years. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of meetings. Yeah. And
well, you've heard about everything you need to hear then, huh?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And yet, I can't help myself. I love to be here. Mm-hmm. And there has always been there have always been certain words that, so for example, the unknown. So for me, this clarity, I mean, the solidness of it, the hugeness of it is maybe that's the unknown, the unfathomableness of it. Is that it?
That's it.
Okay.
Right?
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And the reason that it's so clear is because it's not all filled up with everything we think we know. Right?
And yet I'm quantifying it all the time. My mind is still, of course. The mind is working, and it's like, oh yeah, I know what that is. That's this, right? It's here. It's been here before. Here it is again. Mm-hmm. It's a little deeper this time. It's a little whatever. But the mind is still, right?
Yeah.
Like, I can quantify this experience.
Yeah.
So in a sense, it's actually not so mysterious. I mean, it is.
Right.
But I'm quantifying it all the time.
There you go. And it's clarity, so in that sense, it's not mysterious either.
Right.
Clarity is about as clear as it gets.
Right.
Remember I said, within truth is delusion and sleight of hand, and within sleight of hand and delusion is truth. So it's plain both sides all the time. Clarity is ultimate mystery. Ultimate mystery is total clarity.
Okay.
It's not one or the other.
Right. Okay, that one's been bending my noodle for years, so I appreciate it.
I'm glad we can get
Okay. And so I have another a question. And
okay, throw it out.
I'm throwing it out. So my experience of meditation is that, well, I've never been a big meditator. I do enjoy sitting, and I'm using the words interchangeably right now, by the way. I've never been a, one-point focus, whatever, meditation type of person. So, but I have this, while sitting, my mind, I have a hard time staying awake. Mm-hmm. And where my mind goes is into fantasy. Mm-hmm. And when I say fantasy, I say, a word, someone, there are words in the room or something around, and I am, climbing the slopes of Kilimanjaro with this person, whatever, or, yes. I mean, it's just like I go into, and sometimes really amusing, I'll be cracking myself up. Yeah.
Yeah. And entertaining yourself.
Very much entertaining myself. Yes. And this is the primary way that I take myself, or that my mind engages me in what is not here. Mm-hmm. So in a way, I'm very familiar with, okay, what is here? And I bring focus, I turn attention on itself. Mm-hmm. And then the fantasies come so subtly. It's so subtle.
Yes.
And then 5 minutes will go by, sometimes 10, sometimes an entire sitting period, and it's over like that. And I have engaged in any number of really fun, entertaining activities.
Yeah.
But not. So I guess what I'm asking is, is there I mean, you've meditated a lot more than I have.
Sorry to say, yes.
And so for this particular variant, I mean, I've heard lots of other people talk about sitting and then what happens with them.
Yeah.
This is my primary variation of what happens while I'm sitting. And the tendency when I do go off into that fantasy, it's just like a dream. I will fall asleep. I start to fall asleep.
Yeah, it's how you put yourself to sleep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, I guess what I'm asking for is like, I don't know, it seems kind of ridiculous, but some kind of a technique, or is there something that, what is your experience of this?
Well, my experience isn't going to help you.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
It's not going to do anything for you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
My experience is really simple. Just sitting.
Right.
Period. End of story. Nothing more to say. That's all that's happening. That's it.
Okay.
Okay? So, here's what you do. Because what you want to do, how do I say this? What I want to do is I want to ruin your fantasies, okay? Because if they're really entertaining, then the mind just keeps going with them. But you can't ruin them. First of all, I don't want to set you up so you're in opposition to them, because that's just a new fantasy.
Understood. Yeah.
Right now,
sure.
I'm a guy trying to not fantasize all the time, which is just one fantasy on another fantasy.
I get that.
Right. Okay.
So I'm not with the riding crop right now, lashing myself. Good. Although I do.
If you're in a Zen temple, by the way, what we do is put someone behind you that knows how to use this. This is what staff my teacher gave me, and it is flat because it's made to hit people. She used to have me hit people, so I know. And someone would stand behind you, and they'd whack you every now and then. And if they could tell you were fantasizing, they might whack you every minute or so for 40. But since I'm not really prone to that, and I don't want the lawsuits that would ensue from it, I use it for other means. So you're
a little short-staffed as well.
I'm a little short, right? Yeah. I'm a little short.
There are a lot of us here.
But if somebody doesn't like it, I can run pretty fast. Is to just be conscious of what you're doing. That's all. Stay conscious of what you're doing.
Pay attention, essentially.
More than pay attention.
Okay.
Pay attention to the fact that there is attention. Okay? Be conscious that all your fantasies are unfolding within consciousness. Don't have it as an idea. Then it's just a silly, non-dual bunch of nonsense. Actually experience it. My mind's starting to think about climbing Kilimanjaro. And there's consciousness. And then not just the fact, not just saying to yourself, oh, it's okay, it's in consciousness, because that's a very little effect. Then you start to sense the consciousness that it's unfolding within. Right? So you're just noticing. You're not trying to stop something from happening. You're just becoming conscious of consciousness.
Yeah.
Not like you're trying to look at consciousness or turn it into an object, but there's just consciousness of consciousness. Like this will ruin the fantasy.
An awakened dream in a way. It's like You're dreaming, but you're taking the step back while you're in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're just reminding yourself that there is awakeness within this. There is consciousness here.
Okay.
Because the dream, the illusion, the sleight of hand that happens is that everything is taking place so that you do not remain conscious of the most obvious thing, which is consciousness. That's what all the various illusions are doing, right? How do I do this? How do I make my life? My guru tell me how to find my soulmate. How do I make a decision for my job? Anything, so that the focus goes away from the most obvious thing in the world. In fact, the very thing that the world is, and the focus goes away from that and onto the particular, and mostly onto some sort of battle with it. So instead of doing that, knowing that that's a good fantasy gets you to forget about all that. Right?
Mm-hmm.
When you remain conscious of what's happening, conscious of the fact of consciousness, feeling it, sensing it, then it will ruin the fantasy. Because it will ruin the fantasy, because a fantasy is only good to the extent that it can get you to forget about yourself. And if you're not forgetting about yourself, it's no longer interesting. It's like a movie where you're very self-conscious about the fact that you're in a theater. It's a crappy movie. A good movie, you forget that you're in a theater, don't you? Mm-hmm. You forget you're being entertained. You forget that none of this is actually happening. And you lose yourself. And what I'm saying is, you will not be allowed to lose yourself. Now, that'll be annoying. And the idea isn't to remain conscious of yourself being conscious, because that is a sort of neurosis itself, right? That's its own sort of dream. But it has the effect of getting you out of a very obvious dream state, because it takes the fun out of it. And then, again, if you're not struggling, then the you that's trying to remain conscious of consciousness just sort of inextricably slips out of the picture.
I can feel it's
Right.
true.
And when it slips out of the picture, you do not need to remember that I even ever said anything about remaining conscious of consciousness. When the you has accomplished that and is trying to maintain it, when you just notice it and you just let it go, then forget all about this consciousness of consciousness stuff and just let that last little bit of the illusion of you go. Because then you're actually living the consciousness of consciousness rather than practicing it. You might have to kind of practice it to link you, but then you just let it go. And there you're back in that clarity again. Right? How's that?
Good.
All right. Great. Okay. Enjoy your day.